The air in the courtroom at Fort McNair was thick with the scent of polished wood, floor wax, and righteous certainty. It was a sterile environment, built for the purpose of distilling messy conflicts into clean, binary outcomes. Guilty or not guilty, hero or traitor, honor or disgrace. Major Eva Rostova sat at the defense table, a ghost in her own life. Her uniform was a stark, unadorned olive drab, stripped of the constellation of medals that had once told the story of a brilliant career. There was no silver star, no bronze star with valor, no purple heart. There was only the woman, her spine a steel rod, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Her face, plain and etched with a quiet exhaustion, betrayed nothing. She was a blank page on which the prosecution intended to write a damning story. Across the room, the source of that story sat with his entourage. General Marquesian was everything Rostova was not. His chest was a billboard of military achievement. His jaw was set with the easy confidence of a man who had never known a sincere doubt. He was ambition made manifest, a walking symbol of the modern military machine. Beside him, Colonel Thorne, his ever-present aide, whispered into his ear, a sly smile playing on his lips. They looked at Rostova not as a peer, but as a problem already solved, a piece of administrative unpleasantness to be tidied away. The gallery was a sea of dress uniforms, a jury of her former peers. Their whispers were a low, corrosive hum. Coward, the word drifted over, sharp and clear. Froze under pressure, threw it all away. Eva did not turn. She did not acknowledge them. She focused on a small scratch in the varnish of the table before her, a tiny imperfection in this temple of judgment. Let them talk. The truth has its own timeline. The presiding judge, a stern man with a face like carved granite, called the court to order. The prosecutor, Major Davies, rose to his feet. He was young, sharp, and his arrogance was a palpable force in the room. He saw this case as a stepping stone, a high-profile conviction that would catapult his career into the stratosphere. Members of the court, Davies began, his voice ringing with theatrical gravity. We are here today to address a wound inflicted not by an enemy combatant, but by one of our own. He gestured toward Eva, a grand, sweeping motion of condemnation. Major Eva Rostova, a decorated officer, a leader of soldiers, was given a lawful, direct order during a mission of critical national importance, an order she refused to obey. He let the words hang in the air, a poison gas of accusation. Her refusal was not a strategic disagreement. It was not a moment of confusion. The evidence will show it was an act of pure, inexplicable cowardice, a failure of nerve that jeopardized the mission and, more importantly, betrayed the sacred trust placed in every commissioned officer of the United States Armed Forces. Eva's expression remained unchanged. She watched Davies as if he were a specimen under glass, a fascinating but ultimately irrelevant insect. Her appointed counsel, Captain Jensen, shifted uncomfortably beside her. He was a good man, a competent lawyer, but he was out of his depth. He believed in the system, and the system had already declared his client guilty. His job was damage control, to argue for a lesser sentence, to salvage some fragment of her life from the wreckage. The first day of the trial was a methodical dissection of her failure. Witness after witness, all from Marquesian's command, took the stand. They spoke of chaos. They spoke of a crucial window of opportunity, lost forever because of one officer's hesitation. Colonel Thorne's testimony was particularly damning. He described the scene with cinematic flair, painting Eva as a deer in the headlights, paralyzed by fear as the sounds of battle echoed around them. We were on the cusp of seizing the asset, Thorne said, his gaze fixed on the judges. General Marquesian gave the order to advance. It was clear. It was precise. The path was open. But Major Rostova, she just stopped. She froze. Her unit was static. We could hear her on the comms, just breathing. Nothing. A comedy of errors. If it wasn't so tragic, he added, a note of performative sorrow in his voice. The whispers in the gallery grew louder. Mocking photos, unflattering stills from her personnel file had already begun circulating on private military forums. The Rostova flop, they called it. Public bets were being placed on the length of her inevitable prison sentence. Captain Jensen did his best on cross-examination, but he was fighting shadows. Every question he asked about the mission's broader context, about the intelligence leading up to the operation, was met with a swift objection from Davies. National security, Your Honor, beyond the scope of this proceeding, irrelevant to the charge of disobeying a direct order. The judge sustained every single one. The narrative was being carefully, brutally controlled. The only fact that mattered was that an order was given and it was not followed. The second day belonged to General Marquesian. He took the stand not as a witness, but as a monument to leadership. His testimony was calm, authoritative, and utterly devastating. He spoke of command responsibility, of the difficult choices leaders must make under fire. An order in combat is not a suggestion, Marquesian stated, his voice resonating with power. It is the linchpin of our entire operational structure. When that linchpin breaks, the entire machine fails. Lives are lost. He looked at Eva, a flicker of what looked like paternal disappointment in his eyes. It was a masterstroke of theater. I have known Major Rostova for years. I recommended her for her last promotion. I cannot explain what happened that day. I can only report what I saw, a fine officer failing her duty at the most critical moment. He didn't need to call her a coward. He had wrapped the accusation in the language of regret, making it all the more potent. During a recess, Jensen turned to Eva, his face a mask of desperation. Major, you have to give me something. Anything. Why did you refuse the order? If you don't tell me, I can't defend you. Eva looked at him, her gaze clear and steady. The truth is not a defense this court is prepared to hear, Captain. Then what is, he pleaded. Patience, she said. Just that one word. The prosecution rested its case. It was a clean, airtight presentation. Order. Refusal. Consequence. Major Davies approached the lectern for his closing argument, a predator moving in for the kill. He started by summarizing the evidence, his voice dripping with condescension. But then he shifted his attack. He went beyond the events of the mission. He brought up her service record, not to praise it, but to frame it as a prelude to her fall from grace. And then he delivered the final, personal blow. Major Rostova's father was Sergeant Major Thomas Rostova, Davies announced to the court. A legendary ranger, a man who served 3 tours in Vietnam, who earned the Distinguished Service Cross for heroism. A man who understood what it meant to follow orders, to put the mission before himself. He paused, letting the comparison sink in. To see that legacy, that name, tarnished by such a public and shameful act of cowardice, it is not just a betrayal of her unit. It is a stain on the uniform her father wore with such honor. That was it. The line had been crossed. For the first time since the trial began, a flicker of something moved behind Eva Rostova's eyes. It was not anger. It was resolve. They think they can break me. They'll learn. She leaned toward Captain Jensen, her movement so slight it was almost imperceptible. She whispered 2 words. Project Chimera. Jensen stared at her, uncomprehending. What? The helmet cam footage, she added, her voice a low, urgent command. File I-77. Subpoena it. Now. Jensen's blood ran cold. Project Chimera was not just classified. It was whispered about in the halls of the Pentagon like a ghost story. A Black Ops intelligence program so secret, most of the Joint Chiefs weren't even briefed on its full scope. To request that footage was not just a legal maneuver. It was professional suicide. Major, that's impossible, he stammered. They will never release it. It's above top secret. They will, Eva said, her certainty absolute. Because if they don't, the cover-up is an admission of guilt. Across the room, General Marquesian, who had been watching them with detached amusement, suddenly stiffened. Colonel Thorne's smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of alarm. They had heard the whisper. They recognized the name. Jensen, seeing their reaction, felt a surge of adrenaline. For the first time, he saw a crack in the prosecution's perfect wall. He stood, his back straighter than it had been in days. "Your Honor," he announced, his voice trembling slightly but clear. "The defense calls for the immediate submission of evidence pertinent to the accused's state of mind and decision-making process at the time of the alleged offense." Davies shot to his feet. "Objection. The defense has presented no case. They have called no witnesses. We require one piece of evidence," Jensen countered, his confidence growing. "The complete, unedited helmet camera footage from the accused, designated under Project Chimera, file reference Echo 77. The courtroom erupted. The name Chimera sent a shockwave through the gallery. The judge hammered his gavel, his face a thundercloud. "Captain Jensen, you are bordering on contempt. That material is highly classified. It is also exculpatory, Your Honor," Jensen shot back, feeling Eva's steely resolve flowing into him. "To deny the defense access to it is to deny my client a fair trial." Davies was practically shouting now. This is a desperate stunt, a fishing expedition into matters of national security to distract from a simple, open-and-shut case of insubordination. The judge looked torn. The legal and political implications were massive. But before he could rule, an aide hurried into the courtroom and handed a note to the bailiff, who passed it to the bench. The judge read it, his eyes widening. He looked up, no longer at the lawyers, but towards the back of the courtroom. The gallery parted as a civilian in a simple, dark suit walked down the aisle. He was flanked by 2 Marine guards. It was Secretary of Defense Caldwell. He approached the bench and spoke in a low voice, audible only to the judge and the court recorder. The judge nodded slowly, his face grim. He turned back to the court. "This proceeding is now under seal," he declared. "The gallery will be cleared. All recording devices will be confiscated. This court will view the requested evidence in camera." A wave of confusion and outrage swept through the room as MPs began escorting the stunned gallery out. General Marquesian did not move. His face had become a pale, waxy mask. Colonel Thorne was visibly sweating. Soon, only the key players remained in the cavernous, silent room. Eva, Jensen, Marquesian, Thorne, Davies, the judges, and the Secretary of Defense, who took a seat in the front row, his expression unreadable. "Laugh now. You won't soon." Technicians emerged and set up a large monitor. The lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life. The image was from Eva's perspective, the world viewed through the high-resolution feed of her helmet cam. The sound was a cacophony of distorted shouting, radio static, and the distant crump of explosives. The view was chaotic, panning across the rubble-strewn street of a hostile city. Marquesian's voice crackled over the comms, clear and imperious. "All elements, this is Sentinel. Primary target is at grid 497. I want Alpha and Bravo teams to advance on the primary. Execute. Execute now." On the screen, Eva's unit, Alpha team, began to move forward. But her viewpoint didn't follow them. It stayed fixed on a seemingly insignificant detail to the left of the main advance. A ventilation grate on the side of a half-destroyed building. Dust was puffing out of it in faint, rhythmic clouds. "Alpha, hold." Eva's voice came over the recording. It was the calmest sound in the entire chaotic soundscape. Marquesian's voice returned, laced with fury. "Alpha lead, I gave a direct order. What is your status? Advance on the primary." Eva's viewpoint zoomed in on the grate. She switched her helmet's visual mode to a specialized thermal overlay. The screen shimmered, and the world turned into a psychedelic landscape of heat signatures. The dust puffs were now visible as faint, cool pulses. Secretary Caldwell leaned forward in his seat. Jensen looked at the screen, then at Eva, a dawning understanding on his face. On the recording, Eva spoke again, her voice still unnaturally level. All elements hold position. Repeat, all elements hold. Sentinel, I am reading a micropressure variance from Sector 4. The pattern is non-random. Marquesian's voice was a roar of disbelief. Major, are you insane? I don't care about your goddamn pressure variances. I gave you an order. Move your team. The screen split. On one side was Eva's view. On the other, a data stream from the Chimera program, a string of complex code and sensor readings that were meaningless to most people in the room. But they weren't meaningless to the Secretary of Defense, or to General Marquesian, whose face was now ashen. Eva's recorded voice continued, now speaking as if dictating a technical report. The signature matches Chimera Threat Profile Delta 9. Cascade Explosive System. The primary target is a decoy. The entire sector is a kill box, triggered by proximity sensors. The camera feed pans slowly across the street. Eva is targeting reticle, highlighting almost invisible anomalies in the rubble. Tiny wires. Pressure plates buried under the dust. A whole network of destruction, laid out like a spider's web. Advancing on the primary would have triggered a sequential detonation, her voice explained. The blast radius would have encompassed not only our position, but the civilian hospital 3 blocks north. It's a trap, General. A dead silence followed on the recording. Then Marquesian's voice, no longer roaring, but a tight, venomous hiss. You are relieved of command, Major. That is a direct order. Stand down. Negative, Sentinel, Eva's voice replied, imbued with a finality that defied rank. Alpha Team is holding position, scanning for secondary triggers. The footage played for another 2 minutes, showing Eva calmly directing her team to identify and mark the hidden explosives from a safe distance before calling for a strategic withdrawal. The screen went black. The courtroom was utterly silent. The air, once thick with judgment, was now thin with shock. Major Davies stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape, his meticulously constructed case lying in ruins around him. Colonel Thorne stared at his hands, unable to meet anyone's eye. General Marquesian's magnificent facade had crumbled completely. He looked old, small, and terrified. His world, built on a foundation of ambition and deceit, had just been vaporized. It was Secretary Caldwell who broke the silence. He stood and turned not to the judges, but to Marquesian. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. General, the Chimera program briefed your command on the possibility of Delta 9 systems being deployed in that theater. You were explicitly warned that high-value targets could be used as bait for this new type of explosive. Intelligence you chose to classify and ignore. Marquesian stammered, his voice a choked whisper. Mr. Secretary, the intel was theoretical, unconfirmed. It was confirmed the moment Major Rostova saw it. Caldwell cut him off, his voice like ice. She saw a new form of warfare you dismissed as theory. She did not freeze. She did not panic. She analyzed, she understood, and she saved the lives of every soldier under her command and hundreds of civilians by refusing an order that would have led them all to their deaths. You let that sink in. You didn't bring her here to punish a coward, General. You brought her here to bury your catastrophic misjudgment. You scapegoated the one officer who saved you from yourself. Caldwell turned his back on the broken general. He walked over to the defense table. He stood before Eva Rostova, who had remained silent through the entire revelation, her stoic mask firmly in place. He looked at her stark, plain uniform. Major Rostova, he said, his voice now filled with a profound respect. On behalf of the United States, I apologize. Your country owes you its gratitude. And then, the civilian head of the entire United States military raised his hand and rendered a crisp, perfect salute to the disgraced major. Captain Jensen let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for a week. Tears welled in his eyes. The judge, his face pale, banged the gavel weakly. All charges against Major Eva Rostova are dismissed with extreme prejudice. This court-martial is adjourned. The aftermath was swift and brutal. General Marquesian and Colonel Thorne were taken into custody by military police before they could even leave the courtroom. An investigation was launched that would shake the Pentagon to its foundations, uncovering a culture of careerism and risk-taking that had nearly led to disaster. Major Davies saw his promising career evaporate overnight. He was reassigned to a desk in Antarctica, processing supply requisitions. The story, once unsealed, became a modern military legend. Eva Rostova was a hero. The president called. Congress wanted to award her the Medal of Honor. She was offered a promotion, her own command, a position at the Pentagon advising on next-generation threats. She respectfully refused it all. The day after the trial, she submitted her resignation. She walked out of Fort McNair in civilian clothes, carrying a single cardboard box with her personal effects. She did not want the medals. She did not want the fame. She had not acted to become a hero. She had acted to do what was right. I didn't come to win. I came to show them who I am. Her legacy, however, was cemented. At West Point, a new module was added to the ethics and leadership curriculum. It was called the Rostova Principle. It taught young cadets that true leadership was not about blindly following orders, but about understanding the responsibility that came with them, and having the courage to challenge a command when on-the-ground reality proved it wrong. Years later, a newly promoted Captain Anya Sharma stood before a class of fresh-faced lieutenants. She had been a junior officer in the gallery that first day, one of the many who had whispered and judged. Now, she taught Rostova's story as scripture. She never raised her voice, Captain Sharma told the RAP cadets. She never offered excuses. She just waited. She trusted that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, was more powerful than the loudest lie. She taught us that honor isn't in the medals on your chest. It's in the quiet, unbreakable integrity within you. Eva Rostova was never seen in military circles again. Some said she went to work for a private humanitarian group, defusing landmines in old war zones. Others said she simply retired to a quiet life in the countryside, content to be forgotten. But she was never forgotten. Her story became a quiet reminder, a whisper in the halls of power, of the unassuming woman who was branded a coward for saving everyone, and who, in her stoic silence, proved to be the strongest of them all.